Hi, this is Dr. Mary Nimchek, and I'm going to be talking to you today about purposeful learning, the key to remembering information. Now, this might seem like a silly question to you, but why do you study? To learn, right? But how do you know when you've learned? Most students that I work with have equated memorization to learning. They think if they memorize the information, they've learned it. But what really happens with that is that students will maybe memorize the information. It'll take them a long time to do it because it's very effort intensive and it takes them a long time. But when it comes to the test, they might do a brain dump and kind of regurgitate on the paper. And what happens to that information? Well, it's no longer in their heads, right? So if we want to learn information to its full extent, we want to be able to keep it so that we can recall it and remember it, retrieve it whenever we need to. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how your brain works so that you can actually use the information that you're studying and that you can remember it actually forever. So the information I'm going to talk to you about today is based on educational psychology and brain science. So this is actually a phrase. This is ed psych talk, if you will. So I'd like for you to take a second to read this phrase. Now there's a lot of important information in this. So it talks about learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior and mental associations due to experience. So the things that I want to point out are that it's relatively permanent. Well, what that means is that when we learn information, there's sometimes when we do forget it. However, there's two theories of forgetting, but those can actually be overcome. One theory of forgetting is called decay, and that means that information hasn't been used in a long time. It's stored in the back of your brain, and you can think of it as being covered in dust and cobwebs, and you just haven't gotten to it in a long time. Well, we could refire that neuron up, and you can remember that information. So, for example, if I were to show you a picture of your kindergarten class, would you be able to name all the students in that class? Maybe some of you could, but most of us really can't. But if I were to show you a picture of a student and I would say, remember, this is the student that actually fell off the swing set and he broke his arm. Remember that day? You'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that kid. Well, we just refired that neuron up. So we've overcome decay. The other type of forgetting is called interference. And that's when we just can't get to that memory. It's located on the tip of your tongue and you're frustrated. You just can't pull it out. Well, that means that something's blocking it. You just haven't learned it well enough. So what we can do is next time we see that concept, or maybe it's a person's face, you just can't remember their name, you can just think, this is how I'm going to remember it next time. So you're going to make a better connection, a better association. So we can actually overcome those two theories of forgetting. The other aspects of this phrase, what I want to point out, is the mental associations due to experience. So that's really how our brain works, is by way of associations due to experience. And that means that we're doing something with the information. We're experiencing something in order to make that association occur. Now, this is also a very key phrase. Take a look at this. The study techniques you use, or the study strategies that you use, actually affect what you remember. As I just mentioned a minute ago, a lot of students will memorize information. Well, that's going to affect what they remember. When students memorize information, they do that brain dump on their test, and it's pretty much gone out of their heads. But if you use other associations, which we'll talk about later, you're going to actually be able to remember that information better and longer. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about those study techniques that really don't work, those that are ineffective, and we've all used them. I actually used them when I was a student too. We're going to talk about how your memory works, also about goal-directed studying, and how to take good notes, purposeful note-taking. Now, through my work as an educational psychologist and learning strategist, I've come up with 4 A's of learning. Now, if you use these 4 A's, you can learn in any situation, whether you're an engineering major, a computer science major, an aviation major, or even a history or math major. So remember these 4 A's. The first one is active. Now, we've talked a lot about students who memorize information, and if you think about it, that's really the type of learning strategy that we're most familiar with. If you go back to when you were younger, what did you do? You had to memorize how to spell your name, memorize your phone number, memorize your address. How'd you learn your ABCs? You memorized them, right? How'd you learn your multiplication tables? You memorize those too. So usually that's the only strategy that students use. That's the only one that they know. So they fall back on that quite a bit. But there's some limitations with memorization. We actually, in educational psychology, call that rehearsal. So when you're memorizing information, you have to keep going over it and over it and over it, right? Well, we call that maintenance rehearsal. And it's very effort intensive, and it takes us a very long time. So, for example, if you're using flashcards, what do you have to do? Keep going over them and over them and over them, right? And a lot of times it'll take us longer to go through the flashcards once, and then we don't have time to do anything else. So it's a big waste of time. But what I'd like for you to do right now is do a learning activity with you. I'd like for you to take out a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, whatever you're most comfortable with. And I'm going to read you a series of numbers. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a series of numbers. So after I read the first series, I'll give you a couple of seconds, and then I want you to write it down. So don't write when I'm reading. I want you to listen to me read the series of numbers, and then I'll give you a couple of seconds to write it down. Then I'll read the next one and so forth. There's 6 of these. So you have your paper and pencil? We'll get started. The first sequence is 2, 9, 6, 1. 8, 3, 5, 9, 1. 6, 1, 4, 7, 2, 9. 3, 8, 1, 6, 5, 2, 7. 4, 1, 7, 5, 8, 3, 6, 2. 5, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4, 9, 8, 1. How'd you do? Let's go back and check your work. Without looking at your paper, what's the first series of numbers? 2, 9, 6, 1. Some of you might have been able to repeat that. But let's go through the next number. How many of you can remember the second one? 8, 3, 5, 9, 1. That's a little bit harder, right? Well, let's check your work and see how you did in writing these other ones down. The third series is 6, 1, 4, 7, 2, 9. Most of you probably got that one. The next one, 3, 8, 1, 6, 5, 2, 7. We might have lost a few of you there. How about the next one? 4, 1, 7, 5, 8, 3, 6, 2. Maybe we lost a few more. Now here's the last one. 5, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4, 9, 8, 1. Some of you might have gotten that. Typically when students have gotten that last series, which has 9 digits in it, they either chunk it. So they might break it into parts, just like we say our phone numbers or just like we say our social security numbers. And chunking is a really good way to learn information. If we collect information and we put it in chunks or in pieces and put it together, we can remember things better. So again, we're going back to those associations that we mentioned just a few minutes ago. So if we make it a bigger memory by piecing things together, we're going to be able to retrieve it a little bit better when we need it later. Some students will actually visualize the numbers. So visualization is another good way to remember information. We'll talk about that more as we go through our presentation today. But typically, those are harder numbers to remember. The ones with the 9 sequence are the 9 digits. So what this proves to us is that when we're memorizing information, we can't hold on to it for very long. So it means that it's limited in duration. It also means that we can't hold on to very many things. It's limited in capacity. So it's really hard for us to remember 9 digits. So there's some research that was done many years ago. It was actually in the late 50s by a gentleman named George Miller, who came up with the theory that we can remember 7 plus or minus 2 items. Okay, so 7 plus or minus 2, 5 to 9 things. So if we can chunk things into maybe 5 to 9 categories, we might be able to remember it a little bit better. But a lot of times what we're finding out these days is some students can't even remember 5 to 9 things because of our over-reliance on Mr. Google. So we don't have to use that part of our brain. So actually that part of our brain might not be developing as quickly or as well as it used to. So it's really important for us to use that prefrontal cortex, which is where our short-term memory lies, so that we can use that information and help our brains develop a little bit better. So our first A then is that we have to be active with the information, meaning that we have to do something with it. Memorization, or otherwise known as rehearsal, is very, very passive. We're just looking at the words. So if we know something from a flashcard, that's all we know is the word on the flashcard, the item on the flashcard. We can't really talk about it. We can't really do anything with it. We can't really apply it. You can't really say much more about it than what's on that flashcard. So it's very isolated. It's very discrete. But for us to really remember information better and learn it at a deeper way, we have to be active with it. So active is our first A. Now, I told you that a lot of the information that we're going to be talking about today is based on brain science. The technologies that we have are just amazing as to what we can do. So this is actually a picture of the inside of your brain. What do you think? Cabinets that are lined and stacked on top of each other? Well, really, that's how your brain works. And what I'd like to do is another learning activity with you, and I'm going to prove it that your brain actually looks like this on the inside. So you can use the same piece of paper that you had, maybe flip it over if you like. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a list of 20 words. Now, I just want you to listen to these words. And then when I'm done, I'll give you a couple minutes for you to write these words down as they pop into your head. So what I'm going to do, again, is read you the list of words. You're just going to listen, and then you're going to write them down on your paper as they come into your head, just in the order that they come in, okay? So as quickly as you can write them down, when I'm done reading, the better off you'll be. So here we go. Pumpkin, barber, spoon, carrot, shirt, doctor, bowl, lettuce, sock, knife, lawyer, squash, belt, secretary, pants, fork, shoe, cup, cabbage, nurse. Everybody have their list written down? Anybody want to read their list aloud? When you look at your list, or when you listen to the students reading theirs aloud, what do you notice? Most often, students have categorized the information. Maybe they put together words like pumpkin, carrot, lettuce, squash. Or maybe they put together words like doctor, lawyer, nurse. I didn't read the words that way, did I? But isn't it amazing that our brains just automatically do that? Our brains want the information to be organized. Our brains want information to be categorized. They just automatically do that. So if our brain wants to learn that way and store information that way, why don't we study that way? Wouldn't that be most effective? Wouldn't that be most efficient? Why don't we give our brain what it wants and give it the information in an organized, categorized way? Does that make sense? This is really what the inside of your brain looks like. So when you look at this, you can see that different parts of your brain lights up when you're thinking about certain concepts. So if I were to ask you to think about pizza, one part of your brain might light up. If I want you to think about a dog, probably another area lights up. So our brain works in ways and remembers by way of connections, by way of associations. Let's take a look at this video.
Billions of brain cells are not done forging links with other brain cells. Eventually, there will be trillions and trillions of connections between cells, charged with electrical pulses rippling like lightning storms across the hills and valleys of the brain's deeply furrowed tissue. Every cell in its place, every link between cells carefully organized. Nothing random, nothing arbitrary.
So as you can see on the video, our brain wants to be connected. It wants to connect neurons to form memories. So you can just imagine that our second A is associate. In order to learn information better, we need to make associations, connections, relationships. So when you're learning new information, this is a good thing to do, is connect that new information to stuff that you already know. So in Ed Psych, we say connect the new information to prior knowledge. Now you have a lot of prior knowledge in your brain. You've had different experiences. Some of you might have some work experience and also some knowledge from your prior academics. So there's a lot of stuff in there that you can connect this new information to. Now here's our third learning activity. What I'd like for you to do is take a look at these words. And I'd like for you to remember these words by putting them into context and putting meaning around them. So for example, you might think about tractor. Well, your grandpa might have had a tractor. Maybe your favorite color is green or your favorite fruit is an apple. So what I'd like for you to do is spend a couple of minutes putting memories into context and meaning, making it personal. So remember these words in a personal sort of way. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. As I said before, we all have different information in our brains. You've had different experiences from work, from school, even from talking to friends and family. You've learned other things. What I'd like for you to do is write down as many of those words as you can remember. Okay, everybody have their list down? Let's check your work. How many of you got all 14 words? 13? 12? 11? Isn't that interesting that we can remember these words by attaching context and meaning? There's a lot of things that you should learn from this. One, by attaching context, meaning, making it personal, you can remember them better. Now, if you notice, on the previous two learning activities, I didn't say anything. I just gave you the numbers, I gave you the words, and you wrote them down. We were quiet. I didn't want to distract you. But this time, you actually spent 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's all I gave you, was 90 seconds total to remember these 14 words. And by placing context and meaning around them, you're able to do so because I moved on. I got you distracted. I went on and I started talking about other things. So that's very important. So you can remember information better if you make it personal, contextual, meaningful. Now, have you ever borrowed a friend's notes and you looked at me and thought, wow, what'd you write that down for? Well, again, we all have different backgrounds. We all have different information in our head, so we're going to write down different things when we make our notes. So we bring to the table that prior knowledge that we have. So don't forget to attach new information to prior knowledge so you can learn things better and it'll make more sense to you. Our third A, anticipate. In order to learn things better and deeper, we need to anticipate uses for that. We need to apply the information in a meaningful way. So if you can, when you're learning information, think about if you can use this information in your engineering career, in your aviation career, in your computer science career. Make it meaningful to you. Give it context. Always asking yourself questions. When would I use this formula? When would I use that one? What would I expect the results to be? So answering questions such as these are going to allow you to deepen and broaden that information. Therefore, you're going to remember it better. You can always ask yourself, what else? What else do I need to know? What else do I need to consider? Now let's talk about purposeful note-taking. Many of us will just write notes across the page. However, that's not very useful. There are some better ways in order for us to take notes. So this is a little secret from instructors, is that the things that we are teaching you are based on learning objectives. So that's the knowledge and the skills and even the attitudes that we want you to have when you are completed with the unit or perhaps when you're finished with the course. So from the learning objectives, we're going to develop the content instruction, the materials, the handouts, the labs, anything that we do, we're going to allow you to learn those learning objectives. And then, as you guessed it, we're going to have to assess you. We're going to have to determine how well you learn the information. The other thing that we're actually doing is determining how well we taught the information too. So based on this, if you wanted to take useful notes, wouldn't you just base your instruction and your note-taking on the learning objectives? So think about that. So if your professor wants you to be able to describe the information, make sure that you can. You might want to write the word describe at the top of your page, and then all the notes below that allow you to do so. Maybe the professor wants you to compare and contrast information. Again, you might want to put compare and contrast at the top of your page and make your notes describing that. So essentially, you could have one page of notes for every learning objective. And that way, you're going to be able to perform better on the test. You're going to be learning the most important information that your professor wants you to. But when you're actually taking your notes, it's usually better to draw out a graphic. Some folks call these concept maps. So you can draw something like this. But these are really important for many ways. These allow you to associate information. They allow you to anticipate information so you can see the whole picture. The other thing is these graphics are really pictures. And we're very visual in our memories. And if you think of the cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words, it's really true in learning as well. Can't you remember a picture better than you can a page full of text? Here's just another example. You can actually take your notes across the page, but on the left-hand side, draw a graphic. You're probably going to remember the graphic better than you would the words on the right side of the page. Anybody know who this guy is? Most of you from Arizona might have heard of him. Paul Goldschmidt plays for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now, he's a really good hitter. A lot of times he's hitting home runs. He's hitting the ball out of the park. So when does Paul Goldschmidt practice? The night before the game? The morning of the game? How about at lunch? Well, a lot of students tell me that that's when they study for tests. Why would you study for a test that's the night before, the morning of? If you're in a sport, you typically practice for weeks before. If you're in the performing arts, you also do the same. You would never think of just practicing the night before, or the morning of, or at lunch, the day of the big performance. But that's how we study oftentimes. The other thing I want you to think about too is, what does Paul practice? Does he practice laying down bunts, or do you think he's practicing hitting the ball out of the park, if that's what his goal is? Again, it's very similar to what we should be doing when we study. We should study with the goal in mind. Study with the learning objective in mind. So if you're going to practice the way you're going to play in the game, shouldn't you study the way you want to perform? Let's talk about study time. Some of us might look like this when we're studying. I've heard many students tell me, oh, they can study this way because they can multitask. Well, that's not really true. Multitasking is not really multitasking. It's actually your brain flipping back and forth really quickly, really rapidly. So you're really not able to learn very well. What do you think about this guy? Using his dog as a desk. You can see he's got some cups and glasses in the background. He's probably got ESPN on. Probably not a really good place to study. You know, some folks have asked me if his dog is actually learning by way of osmosis, and I think he might be. But, you know, using your dog as a desk is probably not the best way to study. What we want to do is find that one place, that one location. I don't care if it's in the library, I don't care if it's the desk in your room, but you need to find that one space. And the reason being is that we're sensory beings. We have 5 senses firing all the time. We can hear things, we can see things. You might be hearing the person behind you tap their pencil on the desk. You might be hearing something outside. But we've got all 5 of our senses firing at the same time. So we're always taking in input from our environment. So if you get input like a noise or a sound, or maybe it's too cold, you're going to be distracted. Now what research tells us is if we get distracted 3 times in an hour, we're going to lose that time. So for every time that we're distracted, we lose 20 minutes. So 3 times and you've lost that hour. Do you have an hour to spare? Probably not. So find that one space, and that way your body and your brain will know that, hey, it's study time. Your body's going to kind of meld into that chair, meld into that desk, and know that, okay, let's get to work. We call it as automaticity. We just get used to that situation, and we're going to be more effective and be more useful in our time. So we should also study a little bit every day. If you look at this brick wall, if you think of the left-hand column there, that might be Monday. When we learn information on Tuesday, we're going to add to that. Then we're going to add more to it on Wednesday, and so forth. So if we study a little bit every day, we're going to learn the information better and be able to retain it and retrieve it when we want to. Now, some students might study math one week, and history the next week, and then English the next, and chemistry the next. Well, you're never going to remember math or history or the things that you studied a couple of weeks ago. Our brains just don't work that way. So what we need to do is study a little bit every day. If you think of it this way, if you walk across a field of grass once, what's going to happen to the grass? It'll probably bend over, right? What if you don't walk across it again? It'll pop back up. But if you keep walking over that field of grass in the same direction each and every day, what's going to happen? You're going to build that path, right? Well, the same thing happens in our brain. If you keep going over things time and time again, adding more knowledge to that, you're going to grow those connections. You're going to make it more permanent. What we say is the cells that fire together actually wire together. So using all 5 of your senses is also critical to learning. More gateways into your brain, the more gateways out. So some folks say that there are such things as learning styles. Well, that's not really true. There really is no such thing. There's been years and years of research, and there's been no conclusion as to the existence and validity of learning styles. Actually, what we do is we learn by all 5 of your senses. Learning styles only accounts for 3. We learn by way of our kinesthetic, our touch, also our vision, hearing through our ears. Don't you think you also remember information by way of smell? How about taste? Don't you have some memories that you can remember by way of how they taste? So using all 5 of your senses is very important to learning. So the more gateways in, the more gateways out, meaning that the more gateways and the senses that you can use to take information in, the better able you're going to be able to retrieve that information and remember it when you need to. Sleep. I know it's tough as a college student to get sleep, but sleep is your friend for learning. Actually, when we're sleeping, our brains buzz and process more. So think about it. Your senses diminish. They're not working as much when you're sleeping. The lights are off. It's probably quiet. And so what happens is your brain has an opportunity to actually process that information. So your brain is buzzing, processing information while you're sleeping. So what you can do is actually take a look at the information. Maybe you're having some challenges with a concept, or you can't really understand something. Well, take a look at it before you go to sleep that night. Don't stress over it, but just take a look at it and allow your brain to buzz, or allow your brain to process and work on that information while you're sleeping. Some students actually tell me that they've dreamed about the information. Well, that's better. You can do the same thing when you're napping, too. If you're a napper, you can take a look at the information that you're maybe having a challenge in time with getting that into your brain. Well, take a look at that information before you put your head down to take a nap, and your brain's going to work on it while you're sleeping. So sleep is your friend, so it's really important that you get enough sleep in order to become a successful learner. Now our 4th A, awareness. In educational psychology, we also call this metacognition. And that just means being aware of what is it that I know and actually what is it that I don't know. So you can assess your learning. You can become aware by asking yourself these questions. Did I study enough? Did I focus on the learning objectives? Did I use the right study strategy? What is it that I know? And I think more importantly, what is it that I not know? How many times have you gotten to the end of a chapter or even to the end of a section and you have no idea what you've read? That's called awareness, self-assessing, self-monitoring. That's key to learning, and you need to do this throughout the whole learning process. So if you want to look at that graphically, remember we wanted to start out being active. We need to do something with the information. We need to associate it, make connections, relationships. Also anticipate uses. When am I going to use this? When would I use that formula? What would I expect the results to be? But the entire time we're being aware. Am I really learning this? Do I really understand this? And one way to assess your awareness is by saying it. If you can't talk about it, you probably don't have a good understanding of it. So if you can't say it, you don't got it. So say it out loud. Try to describe it. Try to teach someone else, and you're going to understand the information better. Now, if you do the things that we talked about today, you're going to reduce your anxiety. Now, this is normally called the anxiety curve. Some folks will call it the performance curve. But if you want to be at the peak of performance, you want to be at about a 90 degrees in terms of geometrics. Some of us might walk into a testing situation at 110, perhaps. We're a little bit nervous, but when you're really, really nervous and your hands are sweaty and you're kind of sick to your stomach, you're at a 180. And you can see where your performance is going to be. Pretty low. You don't want to be there. But if you do the things that we talked about today, you're going to walk in pretty prepared, maybe at the 110. But once you start answering questions on the test and you start feeling that success, you're going to move over to that 90 degrees point, and you're going to be firing on all cylinders. So in review, these are the things that we talked about today. Those study techniques that are ineffective, how memory works, goal-directed studying, and purposeful note-taking. I met with a student this past summer at a Starbucks, and I told her the same things that I just told you, and this is what she just sent to me. So the information I provided you actually works. To get 90s and 93s in tough courses like anatomy and biochemistry, you got to be convinced that using these 4 A's and the other strategies that I've shared with you are going to make you a successful learner. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your participation. If you want to get in touch with me, there's my email there, and I also have a website. On the left-hand side is a newsletter that I have that comes out every month, and it's free, so go to my website and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll learn about the brain, and I answer student questions each month. And on the right-hand side is a picture of my handbook that's available in the bookstore. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Good luck, and I wish you continued success.